So now let's put them together. We have this budget constraint here and this indifference curve. When you're looking to figure out the point that the worker is going to choose, you look at the point where an indifference curve is just tangent to the budget constraint, which happens right there. This represents a certain level of leisure and a certain level of income. Now we realize that there were indifference curves that are higher than this one, and there are indifference curves that are lower than this one. However, any indifference curve higher than I1 is unattainable. All of these points represent combinations of income and leisure that the worker can't afford, given the current wage. So even though this indifference curve represents higher utility, the worker simply can't get there. This indifference curve represents lower utility. It's definitely possible for the worker to get here. Under this indifference curve, the worker could choose this combination or one sort of over here that's not drawn. But of course, all of the combinations that are to the northeast of this one represent higher utility. So I1, because it only hits the budget constraint at one point right there, represents the most utility that this worker can get. So you're always going to be looking for a point of tangency between an indifference curve and a budget constraint to find the optimum. So now let's get rid of the numbers and just start talking about things sort of generically here. We have H1 as an equilibrium solution for the number of hours of work. Because we're measuring hours of leisure from left to right, hours of work can be measured from right to left. So H is going to represent a number of hours of work, H1. So if we have an increase, say, in non-labor income that shifts the budget constraint up, suddenly this indifference curve does not represent the most utility that can be achieved. We look for a new indifference curve that will hit our new budget constraint at just one point, and we see that that the new level of work is H2 here. We want to keep in mind that since we're measuring H means hours of work, H2 here is less than H1, right? H2 represents more leisure, which implies less work. So what we've seen here is that when income rises, in the case of non-labor income here, H falls, the amount of work falls. This is the income effect. When you become richer, you can afford more leisure, which is a normal good, so you'll choose more leisure. So the pure income effect says as income goes up, leisure goes up, or the way that we're going to say it, hours of work falls. A change in wage is not as obvious what's going to happen. We can actually get two different results, and I'll show you both of them. In this case here, the wage has gone up, so the budget constraint becomes steeper, and the amount of leisure falls, which means that the amount of work has gone up. However, I could also draw it where the wage increases and the indifference curve has a slightly different shape here, and the amount of leisure chosen increases, which means that the amount of work chosen falls here. So this is because there's another effect in addition to the income effect called the substitution effect, and that says that when the wage rises, you should work more. The idea here is that as your wage goes up, you give up more when you spend time in leisure, right? So if your wage is $8 an hour and you spend an hour watching TV, foregoing an hour of work, you've spent $8 to watch TV. If your wage is $20 an hour, then watching an hour of TV when you could be working is costing you $20, right? So in other words, when your wage goes up, market goods become a better way to get utility than does leisure relative to what used to be the case. And so when your wage goes up, you should choose less leisure because leisure is more costly. That's the substitution effect. Okay. A wage increase causes both an income effect and a substitution effect, right? Because when your wage goes up, your income goes up. That's the income effect. But when your wage goes up, the trade-off between leisure and income changes. That's the substitution effect. So when we put these two effects together, what happens here is the income effect, when your income goes up, you get a wage increase. The income effect says that you should work less because you're richer and you can afford more leisure. The substitution effect says when your wage goes up and you're, in this case, that you should work more because leisure is more costly. So if we're talking about a situation like a wage increase, since you have both effects, they're pulling in opposite directions. When the wage goes up, the income effect is saying work less because you're richer, you should take more leisure. The substitution effect is saying work more because work is pays better. It's a better buy. So you have these two effects that are pulling you in different directions. That's why we can't say for certain what's going to happen to the optimal hours of work when the wage goes up. If the income effect is stronger, then the labor supply curve is going to slope downward, which means that as the wage goes up, the worker is going to choose to work less. If the substitution effect is stronger, then it's going to slope upward, which means that as wage goes up, the worker will work more. The combination of these two effects leads to what we call in the literature a backwards bending labor supply curve. This is a situation where at low levels of income, an increase in wage will induce more work, but as income gets higher and higher, an increase in wage will induce less work. So these are the three possibilities graphically, right? If the substitution effect dominates, then a higher wage implies more work. This is labor supply measured in hours. If the income effect dominates, then a higher wage implies less work. Or if you have both, you could have this backwards bending labor supply curve where at low wages you'll work more in response to a rising wage, but eventually you'll work less. We can imagine some extreme scenario where you have a wage of $10,000 an hour. Many of us would not choose to work more hours than we do now. We would probably work fewer hours. However, we wouldn't work so many fewer hours that we actually earned less money. That would be ridiculous to get a wage of $10,000 an hour and work 1 hour a year when you could otherwise have been making more. So this would be the backwards bending labor supply curve. Theoretically, it makes sense, and like I said, we can think of really extreme examples where this would happen. If you think about it in terms of the actual choices that people make, I don't know a lot of part-time lawyers or part-time doctors, and those would be the people that seem to have higher hourly wages. In fact, people that I do know that are lawyers or doctors seem to work more than I do. So I think in practical terms, I'm not sure how useful this is, but theoretically it can be interesting. I should also point out that it doesn't matter whether every individual in the labor supply has one of these looking curves here. If I add them all up, I can still get a positively sloped market labor supply curve. So in the whole market, I'm always going to draw a labor supply curve to be positively sloped, because higher wages will draw people in, even if those people have this kind of labor supply curve. We can use the discussion of the income and substitution effects to talk about income maintenance programs like temporary assistance to needy families. These kinds of programs usually have two features. One, they guarantee a minimum amount of income. So at low income levels, it actually is just a shift of the budget constraint upwards, right? It raises your income at lower income levels. So this would be just a parallel shift or an upward shift at lower levels of income. But also, a lot of these programs have a situation where as you work and earn your own income, your benefits decrease. Now, aid to families with dependent children was structured in such a way that for every hour you worked, or every dollar you earned, rather, in the labor market, you lost $1 of benefits. So that basically implied 100% tax on your income. So the benefit of working there was no benefit. It was a flat budget constraint. Temporary assistance has, depending on the state, this can work differently, but it takes away a portion of the benefits. So there still is a benefit to working. It's just it's lower than the actual wage you earn, because you earn the wage, but then you lose, a portion of your benefits. So what would the effect of this be? Well, raising income, we know from the income effect, is going to lead to a reduction in work hours, and reducing the wage, which is what that reduction in benefits, it effectively reduces the wage through the substitution effect. We know that that's also going to lead to a reduction in work hours, because if the wage falls, then leisure becomes cheaper and a better way to get utility. So we can see that there's an inherent problem with income maintenance programs, in that they lead to two effects that both cause a reduction in work hours. I'm going to end this part right here, and then put up a second part that involves some changes to this model, or some things that we need to consider. And so I guess I'll see you then.